Charge! There, you have some more of that lightning speed. Welcome to the Rose Garden. You might remember before we charged to the Rose Garden, I mentioned that before the war, I, the great Teddy Roosevelt, had sent Commodore Dewey to Hong Kong. I also sent some folks to buy the coal on the Portuguese Atlantic islands of the Azores. Those two actions were pretty significant in helping the Navy win the two significant naval battles of the Spanish-American War. When war was declared, Commodore Dewey sailed from Hong Kong and steamed directly to the Philippines. The Spanish Pacific Fleet met him at Manila Bay. Dewey gave the order, "You may fire when ready, Gridley," to the captain of the flagship Olympia, and the battle was on. Dewey trounced the Spanish, sunk their whole fleet. U.S. casualties were only one sailor, who unfortunately died of a heart attack while shoveling coal below decks. The Kansas poet Gene Fitch Ware summed up how we felt about the victory. "Oh, Dewey was the morning upon the 1st of May, and Dewey was the admiral down in Manila Bay, and Dewey were the regent's eyes, them orbs of royal blue, and do we feel discouraged? I do not think we do." Of course, Dewey did not have enough troops to occupy the hundreds of islands that make up the Philippines, so troops were dispatched from California. Dewey also brought in Aguinaldo, a Philippine patriot, to rally the insurrectos against the Spanish. The troops that departed from California annexed a couple of coaling stations on the way. Hawaii was an independent country at that time, but a number of Americans had settled on the islands, and it had Pearl Harbor. Talk about a coaling station. Had to be annexed. Had nothing to do with Spain, but everything to do with projecting naval power in the Pacific. The fleet sailed on, and we gobbled up the Spanish island of Guam. Another great coaling station. It's still a U.S. territory today and remains a major platform for military power projection. With Hawaii and Guam, we had the stepping stones to reach the Philippines. We put the troops ashore and conquered the islands. Meanwhile, in the Atlantic, the Spanish set sail with their fleet. They went to the Azores to stock up on coal, but could not buy any because I had already taken it off the market with my coal purchase. This meant that the Spanish Atlantic Fleet arrived in the Caribbean a little short on coal. The Spanish thought they could fuel up in Puerto Rico, but the U.S. fleet was waiting, so they had to run for it, and they went into the harbor at Santiago on the southern side of Cuba. The Navy blockaded the harbor entrance, and the Spanish could not get out. But keeping a fleet on station for a blockade requires coal. And wouldn't you know it, we did not have a coaling station. So, the Marines were sent ashore, and they secured Guantanamo Bay as a coaling station to support the fleet. Guantanamo Bay is not too useful today as a coaling station, but, it makes a great place to store captured terrorists. Once the Spanish fleet was bottled up in Santiago, it was time to send in the army to capture the town and force the fleet out to sea. I was in Tampa Bay area with the army. The first volunteer Rough Riders managed to get on the ships headed for Cuba. It was not a well-planned logistic move, but we finally all got to Cuba. Unfortunately, we were not able to take our horses. Had to fight on foot. General Shafter, he was the commanding general in Cuba. He was a bit fat, a 300-pound plus character. I bet he was a bit overweight for a true charge. The key battle was the fight for San Juan Hill and Kettle Hill. I charged up those hills with the Rough Riders. Should have gotten the Medal of Honor for that one. Sure, I had a little help from other units, like the Buffalo Soldiers. The 10th Cavalry was part of that little assault. Once we had the heights overlooking the city of Santiago, it was pretty clear the Spanish were not going to win. We laid siege to the town as we did not want to assault the 20,000-man garrison. The Spanish fleet then set sail, determined to break out of the harbor. This resulted in the Battle of Santiago Bay. Admiral Sampson won a great victory. The entire Spanish Atlantic fleet was sent to the bottom. The U.S. suffered only one casualty. Poor yeoman George Ellis of the armored cruiser Brooklyn was decapitated by an enemy shell. The U.S. Navy at Manila Bay and Santiago Bay totally destroyed the Spanish Pacific and Atlantic fleets, suffering only 2 casualties, one to a heart attack and one to enemy fire. In the Pacific, the U.S. annexed the Hawaiian Islands and captured Guam and the Philippines from the Spanish. In the Caribbean, we conquered Cuba and Puerto Rico. The Treaty of Paris wrapped up the splendid little war. Cuba gained independence. We paid $20 million to Spain for the Philippine Islands. The Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico became U.S. territories. We kept our coaling station on Guantanamo Bay, and the independent nation of Hawaii also became a U.S. possession. Aguinaldo, a Filipino patriot, didn't like the results much. He thought the Philippines should have been given independence. Let's charge over to my office and wrap up some final points on the Spanish-American War.